Okay, let's talk about a super important setting that you're going to want to use pretty much all the time, I think. Autofocus. We highly recommend that you keep your lenses in autofocus mode, and that's a little switch that you'll find on each and every lens. You can switch back and forth between manual focus and autofocus, but in order to make your life easier, we highly recommend autofocus because animals are unpredictable. They're going to move, even if it's, just as slight as a little twitch or turning their head a little bit to the side. That can be enough to throw off your manual focus. So in order to kind of take that off your plate and not be worrying about it at every second during your session, we recommend autofocus, and there's a few more modes that go along with that, but primarily definitely keep that lens on autofocus so you're not worried about it and thinking about it the whole time.
Yeah, and so focus is the absolute last thing that you should do before you take the photo. Mm-hmm. You should get all of your settings done. You should get your zoom. If you've got a zoom lens, you should get your focal length. You should figure all that out, and then right before you click that shutter button is when you focus. Now, there are a few different modes. You've got, on Nikon, I'm a Nikon girl, you've got your AFS, which is your autofocus single, and your AFC, which is your autofocus continuous. I'm always on continuous focus. That's just that's a setting that I'm used to and that I like because, like Allison was saying, those dogs are always slightly moving, so it's better for me, keeps me happier if I have it on continuous focus. And I know the terminology is a little bit different on Canon.
Yeah, for Canon, I shoot Canon, that would be either single shot or AI servo mode. Servo is that continuous, as she was saying. It's the camera basically paying closer attention to a potentially moving target, a moving subject. But honestly, if a dog is sitting in one place, if they're well trained and I know they're going to be relatively sedentary, I will switch into single shot mode because that's just great for making sure the camera stays locked on focus on that one subject, for example, a dog or a cat. And then AI servo, of course, is for any sort of action. If the animal is moving around, walking around, certainly running, that's immediately when I'll switch into AI servo mode to make sure that I capture that.
Yeah.
Another autofocus point that we want to make is what you're using to actually pinpoint that focus, because you have a few different options depending on your camera, depending on your model. We can't get into specifics because yours is probably different than ours, but there's single point focus, which is when you basically pick a point, and whether that's in the center of your image or whether you want to move that point around to one of the different options, they are built into your camera, and how many options you have is totally dependent on your camera model. But you can move that point around and focus using one single point. You can also expand that point to basically fan out to a few helper points that kind of help your camera remember exactly what it's supposed to be focusing on. So even if there's not enough contrast at that one singular point, it can use the surrounding data to help it, grab that focal point. And then, of course, excuse me. Then, of course, the other option would be to let the camera choose. You can always choose just a general region where you want the point to be, and you can let the camera kind of do its own thing and guess. This is not something that we would typically recommend that you do. So just like being in control, we want to know exactly where that focus is and where that point is going to lie in our image. So we usually control it with either single point focus or single point with those little helper points right around it.
Yeah, I'm always on single point. I'm always just moving my focus point because I don't want to have to focus and recompose.
Right.
Because that's going to throw off your focus. And I want to move that point over exactly where in the image I want it. So I don't always want it in the middle. A lot of times it's kind of up here, or it's up here, or somewhere. Mm-hmm. Somewhere off to the side. So that I can get it right over the dog's eye. Because that's typically where you want the focus, unless you're doing something specifically different.
Typically the photo is going to look the best if the subject's eye is in focus. So that's where I focus too.
Yeah. And then one other thing that I like, that I always use, is called back button focus. And it's where I have taken the focus off of my shutter button and I've moved it back to the back of my camera. That just gives me a little extra control by separating the two.
Because most cameras right out of the box, if you press the shutter down halfway, it's going to focus, and then pushing it down all the way, it'll take the picture. But you can separate those two functions. You can use a different button to focus, and that's still that shutter button to actually take the picture. So that's something that you can get comfortable with over time. It may not be 100% natural when you first start out using it, but there are definitely some instances where back button focus can be extremely useful.
Absolutely. If you need to focus recompose, which I really strongly recommend you don't do it unless you absolutely have to. And then if you do, you have to be so careful. But it's a way to do it without throwing off your focus again. And then if you are creating a composite image or something like that, not having the focus tied to your shutter button is really, really nice. It's important. So
absolutely. And for action photos as well. I know back button focus can be very, very handy for nailing that shot, because as the animal's moving so quickly, if a dog is running towards you, there's so much action happening right in front of you that to ask the camera to use one button to split two different tasks between it can be asking a lot. And it can take that extra fraction of a second for the camera to refocus now that the dog is 5 feet closer to you compared to the last frame that you took. So back button focus can be very handy for action, but in general, whether you're using back button focus or not for action photos, one thing we wanted to mention is you've got to practice to be able to maintain great focus during action photos. You're not going to be right out the gate an amazing action photographer. I'm sorry to break you the bad news. Yeah. But that is definitely the sort of thing that takes a ton of practice, and you'll get better over time. There's different techniques. You'll get more comfortable with it. With a dog, moving side to side versus right at you. It just takes practice, but we just don't want to set your expectations too high just because you have the right settings, you're going to take amazing action photos. It does rely on a little bit more practice and expertise that you'll build up over time.
Yeah, so just go out there, play, experiment. I mean, I'm saying that a lot. but go play and figure out what it is that works best for you, because a lot of it is just personal preference and figuring out what settings you like. But autofocus all the way, get off of manual focus. It's not going to work for you for dogs and cats and horses and all the other animals. Autofocus is where it's at.
Absolutely.